Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I wanted to check in on all these systems that are scattered across my bench over here. They're here for a very specific reason, and that is to try to get them to remain nice and toasty warm. So to try to reach that objective, I've got these pieces of 1x4 wood kind of just resting up on their edge without anything really holding them other than maybe this brick here to prevent it from toppling. Then I placed down that little metal tin, the cookie container with the lights in it, and the lid of it is over on this side. Not as easy to see because it's blocked with pieces of wood. The wood and the plastic that you see here, all meant to try to contain the warmth coming off those little light bulbs so that that warmth can make its way into these containers. These containers are all of varying ages, but they all have one thing in common. They all have got cocoons in them that have been maybe hampered in their development because of the chilly weather lately, and that was the reason for wanting to give them a little bit of warmth. And besides warmth, they need moisture too, so our check-ins typically consist of giving them a little spray down. I just figured I would really quickly go through my little list here of the systems that I want to check in on. The list is very similar to what it looked like 8 days ago when we last checked in. I tried to list their ages, their worm types, how many days they've been sitting here on this rack warming, and even a reference to the associated bin that the worms presently live in, the worms that left behind the cocoons in each of these systems. And I've even included down here at the bottom of the list some future systems that are nearing completion and might also end up needing a similar treatment, although I must admit I'm kind of not very into this whole cocoon nursery thing, so in a way I'm almost trying to avoid it. So this ANC system's not going to run a nursery system, and I'm even thinking with the red wiggler system that's been now migrating for 19 days that I might try just sort of an in-place nursery setup there rather than hauling the worms out and separating them from their castings, just keeping that whole nursery concept alive while the worms are continuously in the same container, given new fresh bedding and food and everything to help build things up. So I'm going to put on a glove and we're going to check in on these systems and see how they're coming along, probably apply some moisture. And I guess the treat here is going to be that we did put in a little food morsel into each system. So I'm curious to see how those things are coming along. Have we succeeded in baiting any worms out of the material? I don't know. Let's check it out. So what we've got out here on the bench is the oldest of the systems. It's the one here at the top of the list with the African nightcrawler cocoons in it, the one that's been now in this nursery mode for 84 days. And it's been on that warming rack for 15 of those 84 days. And it's one of those systems that's got that type of worm in it, the tropical type worm that might be more sensitive to the surrounding temperatures. So it is quite possible that it's just been way too chilly for this system to go anywhere. And my hope is that it just hasn't been too dry or any other sort of extreme that's preventing things from happening. My hope was that the last missing piece on this puzzle was the application of warmth, which would help restart any sort of processes that may have started to slow down due to the temperature drops. But, I am at the point where I'm thinking perhaps I started into this whole warming of the cocoon nursery too late in the case of this very old cocoon nursery bin. Who knows? Maybe because of the very low temperatures to which it was, not very low, but perhaps just low enough to, make the cocoons sort of shut down and realize that they're just never going to succeed, and why bother, so they just maybe at some point just became not viable due to the fact that conditions or optimal conditions had not been met. Now I'm looking at certain things here to try to judge what happened. This thing, for example, a piece of cantaloupe rind, even though I'm not really observing any worms, and maybe I'm just not able to see them because maybe they're too puny. I keep seeing things that look like they might be a worm, so I try to probe them a little bit to see if they'll begin moving, but I don't see any such signs. But it did seem to me as if that piece of cantaloupe rind was nibbled down. Well, at least the part of it that has the fleshy, yummy food on it, the outer tough part of the thing is just sort of missing. And here too, with this pumpkin piece, it does sort of almost look like there may have been some activity here, but I don't see any signs of worms. And it's all of their favorites, right? The little chunk of melon, a little chunk of banana peel, little piece of pumpkin. It does seem like if there were any worms in this system, then it's hard to believe that none of them would have turned out for this little snack we put out here for them. I'm also kind of wondering, could it just be really the temperature, and maybe there are babies in here, but they've all gone to the very, very bottom of the container because that's where the greatest amount of warmth is coming into the system. That might be worth a look, because that does seem like a realistic hypothesis worth testing, right? It would be interesting to see that maybe we do have babies in here, but they're all just retreating down into the warmer reaches of the bin. But if I don't see any babies at this point, it really does make me wonder if it's worth pursuing this effort in this bin any longer, because it just seems almost like a complete bomb, you know? It doesn't seem like I'm seeing any babies of any sizes anywhere. No movement. And as I get down lower, I can definitely feel how the material down here is a little bit warmer than the rest. And I mean, I am at the very bottom now, bringing up handfuls of the stuff that's touching the bottom where there's the greatest amount of warmth. You know, it's not hot or anything, but it's definitely warmer than the surrounding air or the materials up here on top. Definitely warmer down here at the bottom. Actually kind of nice. But not a sign of a worm, you know. So it does seem to me almost like a futile effort to continue with this. I kind of told myself that maybe at some point I would start up just a storage bin for castings, because right now I'm not storing any castings. I guess the last time I harvested a system, the castings must have gone either to use directly, or I might have given them to a friend. I think the latter is what may have happened. It sort of rings a bell. I remember a friend of mine saying how he was still saving the last batch of castings I had given him, and I'm like, dude, just let me know and I'll give you more. So I gave him another bucket and told him, it's like, don't be bashful, let me know. But I'll tell you, it's unfortunate, and I'm not gonna, blame the worms or anything like that. I would have to pretty much consider myself as the responsible party for what either did or didn't occur in this bin. And I guess what didn't occur, as far as I'm concerned at this point, is any hatching of cocoons. So I'm not really interested in pursuing this test any longer, I believe. I think I'm going to pretty much call it quits with this particular bin at this point. After 84 days, I'm going to write this one off as a completed attempt. Not a fruitful, successful attempt, but just a completed attempt that didn't yield really any positive results. Maybe I let the material get too dry. Maybe I got into the watering of the stuff too late in the game. Maybe it was left to get too chilly for too long. And maybe I started applying heat to it a little too late in the game. So either way, it doesn't matter where I made the mistake. I do believe that some sort of a mistake along the way, though, or some option that could have been taken but wasn't, could have potentially sent this system down the other road of having the cocoons in it hatch, and then we'd have X number of additional baby African night crawlers. But the fact that it didn't work isn't the end of the world either. It's kind of in that live and learn category. I definitely don't consider myself an expert when it comes to these cocoon nurseries. And I'm also not really well equipped to deal with them either, especially if, for example, they need warmth in the winter. And if you're going to expect success, you need to make sure you're applying the right amount of warmth. And if you're not, then, well, don't hold your breath for good results. It ain't going to happen. So I figured I would go track down the bin that these cocoons came from. And luckily I've got another little quick reference sheet here. You could see that the reference container in which the worms live that left these cocoons behind is the bin that we're doing these lasagna feedings in. So I know which bin that is. I can throw these in there and at least put this little collection of bedding and food scraps to better use than having it in here. There's nobody in here to eat these. But that other bin will probably benefit from having this around. So let's set this one aside and we'll press on into the next bin, see how that one's progressing. Okay, so this container with the cocoon nursery in it is from the batch of worms that I refer to as the mixed batch of worms. And they got that name because it's a mixed variety of worm types living within this system. Well, they're cocoons, theoretically. The worms that left this material behind, these finished castings and whatever cocoons that may or may not be in here, those are the worms that I presently have living in my vermibag tote. And they've been in that vermibag tote for the past 58 days, and correspondingly, that's how long this system has been in this mode, for 58 days. But that doesn't mean any cocoons that were already within the material didn't already have a chance to start developing, and who knows, maybe immediately after the worms were removed from here, who knows, maybe it was immediately after that that some of the cocoons in here started hatching and replenishing the population after all the adults had been moved out. So my idea here was just to take like a piece of napkin or whatever this was and sort of cover things up, just in case, there might be a need for some sort of like a carbon-based food product while the worms are maybe nibbling on some of this delicious fruit and vegetable matter. So let's see if we can pull some of this stuff aside and try to determine if it's working. Is it attracting worms? If nothing else, it seems like it might be triggering the growth of some fungus or some mold. Some of this hairy white stuff on the banana peel looks like it might be some form of mold. Definitely working down the banana peel because the banana peel is super fragile. So I guess right here within this little pocket of material right below where the foods were is where we might expect to find a worm or two. So that's kind of cool. I'm just trying to gauge whether or not these little juvenile worms could have potentially already been born and were just so tiny that we missed them, or maybe just didn't really hatch in time to catch up with all the adults that were making their way over into the feeding and collection area to be relocated into their new home. After 58 days, almost 2 months, some of these could have potentially been born here. They're all fairly small. None of them seem to be large enough to be of breeding age. I would almost say with those yellow tails, those mostly look to me like red wigglers, but I'm not really a good worm identifier. I'm just guessing that that's what they are based on those little yellow tails that I can see. The other types of worms in this so-called mix are also European night crawlers, of which I don't really see too many, I don't think, usually when I'm checking in on my population of mixed worms. Gosh, should we take these little guys out as long as we've got them all here? I mean, we are going to just throw these food items right back into the middle here and let them continue. Yeah, there's no real reason to go through the trouble of pulling these little guys and relocating them. I believe if we just put them back in the middle where we found them and give their food back to them, they'll just stay pretty much in place where they are. The other thing that I've been doing every time we check in on these systems is apply some moisture. But I think I did kind of go super generous last time, and as a result of that, I believe that the material is not needing any additional moisture at this point. It seems so nice and damp. Wouldn't want to make it get muddy or anything like that. And I know I always sort of disqualify my own personal opinion on the moisture in my systems, because I usually don't consider my opinion on that matter as like an expert judgment. In fact, I usually think to myself, oh, to me it looks great, but then most of the feedback I get in the videos on the comments is that, no way, man, that could definitely use some more moisture. So I usually take my initial gut feeling that says, sure, there's plenty of moisture, and just discard it, thinking that it's probably incorrect, because there probably isn't enough moisture and that it probably could use some. But you know what, I'm going to stick to my guns on this particular case, where it does feel to me like maybe between the application of moisture as well as the placement of these chunks of food in here that still, I can feel, have moisture content to them, a good amount of it, I think we're okay, you know, especially since we're going to cover back up and get that plastic back on top. That plastic will prevent any of this valuable moisture from exiting the bin. It'll stay right down under the plastic. And this section, besides being, you know, rich in food and as well as little even carbon / bedding type material, that's where the moisture is too, it seems, coming from that fruit and vegetable matter, whatever it was. So things look pretty good in here. And after, you know, 58 days, it makes me wonder how much longer do I keep going with this? Do I start considering this as pretty much all I'm going to get in terms of babies hatching and coming up to the collection area? Maybe after only 15 days of keeping it warm, is it fair to expect that maybe there'll be more and I should just hold out a little longer? I don't know, but I think I will just let it continue for a little while longer. But I would like to sort of give these systems sort of a finish deadline, if you will. I don't want to allow these things to just go indefinitely. I'd really like for them to eventually, you know, have a conclusion date, a finish date. And maybe if we don't see any worms smaller than the ones that we observed today, next time we check in here, maybe we will just consider it as a done deal, and that we shouldn't expect any additional baby worms to come cruising up for those delicious morsels. So, I don't know. Let me know if you think that that assessment and that game plan for this bin is the right way to go. But let's go get the third one out here and see how that one's coming along. Okay, who remembers from the list what kind of worm is in this cocoon nursery? In case you need something to refresh your memory, it's the one that you see listed as an ENC cocoon nursery, the older one at this point, the one that's been operating in this mode for 38 days, a little bit over a month, and it too has been on the warming rack for 15 of those days. These ENCs probably really enjoying this environment. You can even see where a lot of the moisture trapped beneath the plastic is sort of trying to evaporate, but getting caught over there in the plastic. I know it's nothing more than just, you know, evaporated moisture condensing on plastic, but I always like to refer to that as sort of the terrarium effect when I see it. And it's exactly what we're going for. This plastic is where we want any sort of moisture that's attempting to escape to be stopped in its tracks and held in place so that it can't leave the bin. I think we've got another little hitchhiker here on the plastic, but just in case we didn't get them all, I'll fold this thing in half so they don't freak out because of the dry air. You can see that we've also got a couple hanging out on this paper as well, just stretching themselves out. Look at the size of this guy. Holy cow. He's just sprawled out all over the place. Oh, no wonder. It's two worms, that's why. That was interesting. I thought I had like this massive European nightcrawler here. and it was just two of them back to back, basically. I think that was tail to tail, if I saw it correctly. All right, here too. Hopefully we don't have any worms hanging out on this material. Wouldn't want them flipping out because of the dry air or the bright lights and have them cruise away into a dry, dangerous spot where they would be doomed, basically. So I think we'll do more or less what we did before too. Now, I've not really gone crazy during my last couple attempts at migrating worms and relocating worms out of their old systems into their new systems. I think on this system already I was starting to become a little bit lax and already telling myself that, hey, at some point when you get to the finish line with the cocoon nursery, you'll have all these little babies that you need to collect up anyway. So as long as you're going to be in that mode of, you know, rounding up worms anyhow in the near future, then don't sweat leaving behind a few stragglers when you do the relocation of the worms. If they remain behind, they'll be just fine in here, and they'll be there to greet the babies once the babies arrive. And then they'll get hauled out at the same time as the babies when the time comes for that to happen. So, oh, nice. It seemed like I popped right in on a couple very small babies. These are worms that were definitely hatched here in this system. And based on their size, geez, I don't know, I was watching some other videos where a guy was pointing at a worm approximately this size in his system, and I guess he might have had the knowledge to, you know, say pretty certainly that that worm had only been born maybe 3 or 4 days prior. And that little guy is puny. And I see a lot of them. I see another one right there. The moisture is nice and damp over here, right below where the food was. So I would think that some of these really tiny ones must have been born here, must have occurred just recently in the past week. Some of them are still also juvenile size. I mean, the ones that we bumped into early on when we first arrived, none of them appeared to exhibit, well, maybe I do see it right there on that little guy. You know, that thick little bulge, that formation that appears on their body, indicating that they're of mating age. We might bump into a few, and those would be the worms that we would probably have to guess were ones that stayed with the material once the rest of the population was moved out of this stuff. But any other ones that are still pretty tiny in size, oh, it's nice and warm down here. I keep forgetting that I'm, you know, operating here in bins that have been receiving warmth. So it was a little surprising when I probed down deep to get into this material, and I felt the warmth of it down low. Here too, it just feels like moisture levels are just fine. Over the past few check-ins, I've been generously applying moisture, and in each case, I've always been protecting the moisture content of the bin by covering with plastic. So I believe that we're in good shape here. The only real question that remains is how much longer do we go with this one? This one to me seems like maybe we've got a worm species in here that's a little bit more tolerant to the cooler temperatures, so it's unaffected by those cold temperatures when it comes to the hatching of their cocoons. So we're definitely seeing little babies in here that who knows, maybe they were hatched because of the additional warmth we provided to the bin. I really can't say for certain, but I think the best thing we could do here is just let it continue. You know, I thought about running upstairs and reinforcing the food if it was going to begin to run low on any of these, but I don't see that happening. Seems to me like we've still got plenty of stuff here that also still has a good moisture content to it, so it'll continue to attract worms and create a nice little section right beneath it that the worms are going to hang out in and enjoy. And I guess at some point when we really go after the worms to try to move them out of these systems, when we decide it is time to bring them to a close, then we will probably want to check the lower reaches of the bin to see if there's babies down there too, maybe, you know, hanging out down there because they enjoy the warmth. I don't know, but either way, when it does come time to get the final haul out in here going, I think we probably will look around pretty thoroughly to see if we just don't miss any pockets of material in which there might be some worms huddled up and hanging out. So looking good in here. I like what I see. I'm just trying to remember, did we have this thing in here as such, or was it this way? I think it may have been this way. It seemed like it was adequate and it was doing a good job because things were really nice and damp under here. So let's get on to the last one. That one's European night crawlers as well. Alright, so this is the one that has been in this mode for the shortest period of time at this point, only less than 2 weeks, 13 days. So we'll do the same thing in here, try to size up how things are progressing. And if we need to add water, we'll add water. If they've done away with the baiting materials that we left for them, then we can replenish. Because this system may have been really the one where I felt like I might have left a good number of adult-sized worms behind. It did seem like this was the system in which I was most blasé about the fact that, hey, who cares, we're going to be back in here later to do a final roundup of the babies anyway. We'll get the stragglers then. So we might find a good number of worms in here, other than babies enjoying the little treat that I laid out for them. You can see I went a little bit, I don't know, overboard is the right word, but I was pretty zealous about covering up here with all these pieces of cardboard and paper. Perhaps this stuff could have just gone over into the new bin that the adult bins, that the adult worms are in now. And these are the worms that the worms that left this material and the cocoons and the material behind are the European night crawlers that recently got relocated into 3 separate buckets. So all the worms that had collected on this edge of the bin that had been lured out of the finished compost were segmented into 3 separate little batches and moved into 3 separate buckets. So the idea with that was to try to just basically expand the amount of space in which the worms can live, and continue expanding the size of the space that they live going forward, so that maybe that extra space that they are given will trigger a little bit more breeding, you know, sort of that sense that there's plenty of room for them here and plenty of food and moisture, so maybe they'll start into the propagation of their numbers in those buckets if I continue to be really generous with bedding and food and everything else and keep them comfortable. So that's what I'm after over there. But what I'm after over here is just sort of an assessment of how things are progressing. I think most of the worms we've seen so far are probably ones that just sort of were left behind, you know. I mean, some of these are definitely bigger than, you know, only 13 days since we set this nursery system up. I think a good number of them did just sort of stay behind. And that's fine, you know. I think there too I was sort of forcing myself into, you know, not striving for that high degree of perfection in terms of how finished the compost was and how successful the depopulation of the material was. I just kind of went for that good enough approach, and I decided I would just sort of consider it as a done deal, move the worms over into their new job, and then start into the you know, fostering of this system to try to help any babies in here or any cocoons that still have yet to hatch succeed in either hatching or getting rounded up with the rest of the crew. So here, you know, this system again feels pretty good from a moisture perspective. I'm actually kind of surprised that I'm not I'm not applying any moisture today. But as you saw, my plastic coverings on all these is pretty thorough, and in this case there was even that extra coverage brought on by all this cardboard covering things up. Every little bit seems to help to hold the moisture down within the material. So since it is helping, I think we'll just keep this cardboard and paper with this population for now, and at some point when it comes time to haul them out and reunite them with the rest of the family over in the buckets, then, you know, we'll bring along all this bedding material, paper and cardboard and stuff like that, so that they can work on it in their new home with their parents and siblings and relatives. But that's pretty much all I've got left to do today, is get this thing covered up, I guess. And well, I did sort of disassemble my warming tower over there, or whatever you want to call it, my rack, my warming rack. It's kind of in pieces because I didn't really take the care to keep it intact. Right now it's just venting all of its warmth out into the room. But once I get done here and I rinse off my glove and remove it, I got both hands, I could work a little bit easier. I'll make sure that my warming rack is reassembled, but at this point it's going to be -1 system. It's not going to get those ANC cocoons put back on there, that oldest bin that we checked in on in the beginning. At this point I'm just writing that one off, and the castings that are in that material are simply going to go into storage at this point. Seems like the right thing to do. So that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.